We have criminal defense attorney Joe Episcopo, one of the attorneys I used to interview quite a bit back when I was in Tampa, Florida as a reporter, and haven't talked to Joe actually in a decade, but I thought this would be the case to bring him back on for because Joe has won some seriously high profile cases, and he still thinks that Alec Baldwin is likely going to face some hard time. So I want to start, Joe, before we get into lots of the nitty gritty of the case, with the infamous interview with George Stephanopoulos where Alec Baldwin says he didn't pull the trigger. So let's watch this, and then I want you to take it away from there.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them. Never.
What did you think happened?
Okay, so he says, there you go. I didn't pull the trigger. I would never pull the trigger while pointing a gun at someone. And a lot of people said that was totally nuts. What do you think about that?
Well, it's more like totally untrue. And like I said, one time a policeman told me a lie can be better than a confession. And that's going to hurt him. You don't talk. You certainly don't go on television. Even when you don't want your client to testify, because once they get on the stand, that kind of stuff happens that you see. They start rambling on and the jury convicts them. So that will be used against him. Now he may be forced to take the stand to respond to that interview because they'll play that.
All right. You also said too, what was it when we were talking on the phone? You said there was like a mounted catfish or something somewhere in a restaurant. And
no, it's a law office. He's got his mouth open, and he's hanging there on a plaque, and it said his caption is, "If I didn't have my big mouth open, I wouldn't be hanging up here."
Okay. All right. So let's go back in time just a little bit. So it's been kind of a while. What ends up happening, right, is that he's on set of this movie Rust, which he I don't think has necessarily said and confirmed that they were understaffed or hiring low-paid staff, younger people who maybe weren't as experienced, but that's what some of the staff has said. So he's handed a gun, right? We're going to get into all the details, get the names and everybody, because also the armorer has been charged with involuntary manslaughter too. He's handed this gun, points at the cinematographer, shoots. Allegedly, he says he doesn't pull the trigger, but somehow the gun goes off. Okay, I'm gonna just leave it. That's what he says. Okay, somehow the gun goes off, and he kills the cinematographer. Very tragic case. Very sad story.
By the way, he shot the cameraman.
Right. Yeah. That's the cinematographer. I think that's the woman. Is that who you're talking about?
No, that was the director. And then there was a cameraman there, next to the director.
Oh, both. That's right. Yeah. And he was just injured, but he survived.
Yeah. Injured,
right.
But survived. Right.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. Right. So he survived, but she died. And, and he's been resistant to really taking any responsibility for this from the beginning. However, you're saying he just would have been better off to just have said nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Say nothing and lay low profile. Don't answer questions when, they're always following him around in New York. They want to get a, TMZ. They follow people. You just can't answer questions when you're in this situation. You keep your mouth shut.
Okay. Let's go real fast to this clip because this is where he tries to explain what was really going on. Let me just turn this up a little bit here. All right. Tell me if you can't hear it, Joe. Here we go.
It will not make sense to people. If a bullet comes out of a gun, they say, well, then someone fired.
You're familiar with this. Did not come from me. This came from the DA's office themselves. You're familiar with what fanning a gun is. Have you heard of that phrase, fanning a gun?
Yes, but explain.
So if you pull the hammer back and you don't lock the hammer, if you pull the hammer back pretty far, in old Western movies, you'd see someone fan the hammer of the gun. The hammer didn't lock. You pulled it back to an extent where it would fire the bullet without you pulling the trigger.
The actor also.
Okay, what do you think about that?
I never heard, the FBI is going to have an expert that says that. When Clint Eastwood was doing that, fanning his gun in The Unforgiven, he was still pulling the trigger, just fanning the thing back. You still got to release it back to hit the bullet. So the gun, I don't think the gun works like that. You say that you have an expert there in the house. What's he think?
He is going to join us in a few
Okay.
minutes. He's getting his camera set up. So yes, everybody, my husband is going to be joining us. He's firearms expert, firearms safety expert.
That's what we need. Yeah, he can answer that question.
I'm curious though, like, do you think, since this case seems to have been vetted extensively by those who are deciding to take him to court, is it unlikely that they wouldn't have already considered his defense in that regard? Like, if they thought that was a worthy defense, I mean, wouldn't that be an explanation? They might have said, okay, we're not going to charge him. I'm sure they've heard him say that would be something that they have already been privy to, and they still decided to charge him anyway.
No, because if they didn't charge him, everybody would say, "Well, he's a privileged actor. We don't charge people like that." I don't see that at all. He was going to be charged.
Okay. I accidentally muted myself. Let's go real fast to this, because I think this is also interesting. The New York Post has an article that says Megyn Kelly says, and she's a lawyer, but she was a prosecutor, I think, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Okay. Alec Baldwin will beat manslaughter rap, not a high likelihood of success. And the quote is, "My initial instinct is there's not a high likelihood of success on the criminal charge. Not a huge fan of Alec Baldwin, but as a lawyer, I don't see this playing all that well with the jury. I do think, however, that people will celebrate this to some extent because he's loathed by people on the right." And I do want to ask you, too, about the politics of it, because, of course, Joy Behar weighed in on this, the gun aficionado that she is on all things. But anyway, she weighed in on this and said that he's just basically being hunted by conservative DA, that he's just being made an example of because he's, a liberal, and this is all politics. But let's talk Megyn Kelly real fast. So she's saying, no, it's unlikely a jury is going to go for this. But you've defended a lot of people.
And I prosecuted a lot. I was a prosecutor for 12 years.
Yeah. So what do you think about this? Do you think a jury will buy it?
First of all, these shows, Megyn Kelly and they want to say something outrageous so that they get on the night cable shows. That's the new thing for ratings. You say an outrageous thing and you know that Fox, Newsmax are going to quote you, and you're going to get on television at night, and people may watch your show the next day. That's how you market these competitive shows. That's all this is. Megyn Kelly, all of them, they are marketing their shows, saying things that will get people to watch them. So it's unreliable.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So you're saying she just wants people to watch. It's not because she has something. I don't know, that there's something about this that because I don't see a whole lot of detail and I haven't watched it, I'll be honest with you, but that there's no reason to believe a jury wouldn't convict him.
She's in a pattern now. I'm noticing her at least once a week getting in the New York Post, getting quotes on of different things she's doing, not just this. She's trying to, get people to watch. So there's a pattern that's happening all the time. So yeah, this is just a promotion. Ratings are everything. It's where the money is, and money is what it's all about.
Isn't that why I have you on?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to get you any sponsors or better ratings, but we're going to try.
It's a good thing I already have a sponsor. Don't forget, everybody, if you want some great wine, I don't recommend drinking AllisonWinePromo.com while on the set of a movie handling a firearm. But if you're at home and not driving and you're just watching this podcast, and that's a great opportunity for an Allison Wine promo. So go get 50% off my favorite Malbecs from Argentina, 50% off shipping. The reason that Bonner Wine is a sponsor is because they heard me on another podcast talking about how my favorite wines are high altitude Malbecs from Argentina. And then they wrote me and said, would you like to be someone that we sponsor, because that's what we have. We have high altitude Malbecs from Argentina, and they're genuinely my favorite wines. The one on the left is one of my favorites, the Rogue Malbec. The one in the middle is from an extreme altitude vineyard from almost 9,000 feet. We ski at 3,000 feet, so that should just give you a sense of how high up These reds are, they work very hard to survive in those conditions, which affects the flavor of the wine, which I think is very good. So go check them out. Don't also forget, you can go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, which is a USDA certified organic coffee from Nicaragua. They've got light roast, dark roast. Right now I'm drinking the black edition, which is very good. It's a very smooth, low acidic, in my opinion, dark roast. I'm a big dark roast drinker, which somebody told me means I don't really know coffee, because if you're a medium roast drinker, then you really know coffee. So if you're a medium roast, you know what, you can go get, let's see, the Estate, I think, is a medium roast breakfast blend. Go check that out. They've got sample packs. You can get a bunch of sample packs. You can also get tea. There's a Caturra tea, which is tea that you make from the coffee fruit. So great way to support my work if you're already a coffee tea drinker or wine drinker. Let's go back to this, Joe. Okay, so one question I think a lot of people had as this investigation was ongoing is why did it take so long? I mean, a lot of people are charged right away, and it seemed to a lot of folks that Alec Baldwin was getting kind of the white glove treatment, if you will. What do you think about that?
Well, I like to compare it to the Idaho case where they took an awful lot of time. And that's what's going on now. They're taking an awful lot of time, especially when it's high profile. They want to make sure when the prosecutor gets on there, like in the Idaho case, we got DNA, we got his DNA, he's guilty. They can almost say you're guilty. Of course, now they're polluting the jury. But in any event, these prosecutors are being more careful because they're under the gun too. You know, our prosecutor in Hillsborough County, Tampa, was fired. He just lost his case against the governor. He was fired.
Do you think that since you bring up, state laws, that kind of thing, do you think that the location of the shooting will have any effect on the outcome of it? It's New Mexico, right? So, like, this is the LA Times. Under New Mexico's involuntary manslaughter laws, Baldwin could face up to 5 years in prison if a jury finds criminal negligence in his accidental firing of a vintage Colt revolver during the setup of a camera angle in October 2021. And they're saying jurors will have to weigh whether he, quote, should have known of the danger involved when he pointed a loaded gun at Hutchins or acted with a willful disregard for the safety of others. That's what they're saying is going to be really the crux of the case.
Well, let
What do
me
you
put
think?
it a different way. He should have taken steps to ensure that it was unloaded. Just because the inexperienced armorer handed him the gun and said it's okay, he should have taken one more step and checked it himself. That's the problem, and that's where the jury's going to get him. He didn't use that caution that you have to use that's going to be in the jury instruction. He wasn't cautious. He was reckless.
Do you think that that they could be convinced that, this is just the way things happen on movie sets, that you're supposed to be able to trust that the person who hands you a tool is safe, and that's just the way it works on movie sets, and so he wouldn't have had any reason to believe otherwise, that in other words, does precedent and the way things work in these situations matter at all? Or is it, no, listen, every person, regardless of how many times it's been done these ways, should always be paying attention to safety protocol?
Well, again, we're talking about a firearm here. We're not talking about a beam that falls down off of a set and kills somebody. The firearm is the crucial thing. That's why there's a 5-year mandatory extension of the sentence. But, again, the question is going to come up. Did he do what he should do to have made sure? You can't just accept this word of this armorer when you know they're new at this. So, and I think what you're doing what the defense is going to do. They're going to put this on, blah, 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 blah. But the prosecution's going to be able to say, this is how it's done. And then they're going to use the law about, let me see what it says here. I wrote it down. A lawful act. They were not doing anything unlawful. Is a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner or without due caution or circumspection. That's what the prosecutor is going to be arguing in the closing argument with that instruction. Due caution and circumspection. Circumspection. And he didn't do that. That means he was reckless, and he could get hit with that 5-year aggravated factor.
The Assistant director David Halls, according to the New York Post, handed the loaded gun to the actor, accepted a misdemeanor charge in a plea deal. This is the special prosecutor quote. If any one of these three people, Alec Baldwin, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, or David Halls, had done their job, Halyna Hutchins would be alive today. It's that simple. So when they're saying that Alec Baldwin didn't do his job, and then we're going to get into the armor in a second, but when they're saying Alec Baldwin didn't do his job, what is she saying?
He should have checked. He's been in 40 movies at least. He's always been involved with guns. He must have done these things before. He should have, since he's an experienced movie actor that have been involved with firearms. The jury's going to know that. They're going to look at that. And they can say, why didn't the guy just look? Why didn't he check? It's a gun.
According to the New York Post, they have a quote from Gutierrez-Reed's lawyer saying that so this is the armorer. So let's switch to her for a second, saying that she did not commit involuntary manslaughter. They're a result of the charges are a result of a very flawed investigation and an inaccurate understanding of the full facts. And that once those facts are out there, he says that they believe Hannah will be exonerated of wrongdoing by a jury. Now, one of the things that she's been very vocal about is that she had to do two jobs, that she was not able to do her jobs well because she was stretched thin on time and attention. Is that an excuse?
No, that's an admission of recklessness. You don't say stuff like that. I'd use, if I was a prosecutor, I would shove that right back at her. Well, I'm too busy to check the gun. I'm overworked. I'm underpaid. I'm inexperienced. It ain't my fault. I think it's going to work.
Okay, let me bring this one up. Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer in charge of ammo and weapons on set, has repeatedly denied responsibility for shooting. In January 2022, she filed suit against the props company that supplied the rounds, alleging it sold blanks and lives mixed together. How about that as a defense?
Well, some of the witnesses on the set have said they heard guns going off and live rounds being fired. Oh, that's going to come in too. So this is kind of like, somebody should have wondered, what did I just hear a gun go off and a live round hit something? No, she's trying to put the blame. Everybody's going to try to blame somebody else. You see how that is.
Yeah.
Baldwin's blaming her. She's blaming this other person, but they're not charged. Those two are charged. They're going to be in the box, and they're going to have to explain it.
Here's the Joy Behar quote. Joy Behar suggests charging Alec Baldwin in Rush shooting was political. He's a target for Republicans. What do you think about that? How's politics playing into this?
Well, remember what I told you about Joy. Every day on her, and The View, they do this on The View, they all try to say something outrageous. And then you end up on The Five. You end up on Tucker Carlson. You end up on Rob Schlapp. You end up on all these shows, and your show is advertised all night long. Anybody that watches these, there are probably about 10 million people watching all these different cable shows. So that's all that is. You can't take anything that they say serious. They are just promoting their show. And that's how you get people to watch. You got to say, look, remember Springer, Jerry Springer? Come on.
Right.
How do you think he got people to watch that show? Even he thought his show was ridiculous. But you do stuff like that to get viewers, ratings, and advertisers because they pay you more money based on your ratings.
Okay, here, I think this is Behar. Okay, yeah, right, this is Behar. As a person who's been in a couple of movies, all you're thinking of is your part when you are an actor. You're not worried. I was not worried that the set, my brassiere is going to fall off me or whatever. Somebody else has to worry about that. You're interested in your lines and your character and where am I now? One of the things that I take away from that, and really just this whole situation, I was talking to my husband about this earlier, who again is going to join us as a firearms safety expert, is a lot of these people who are very I think to be fair to call anti-gun, very I don't know. I would say they likely have very little experience with firearms. That's what I get from a lot of these statements. Like somebody else just should have checked, because it seems like people who deal with firearms regularly think that's nuts for you to say something like someone else should just be responsible for it. That to me reflects more a lack of regular contact with or knowledge of firearms at all. Like, and so, Alec Baldwin, she's saying is being targeted, because he's pissed off Republicans and firearms owners or whatever. And so they're going to make an example of him. But if you're somebody who, if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of knowledge about guns, you want to be out there because you want to restrict gun ownership. And I guess I don't understand why would you have guns in your movie? It seems to me like if you want to hate on cars and not get a driver's license, then you shouldn't be out there driving a car. It would be a negligent act, in my opinion, to not be regularly knowledgeable. Like my husband was bringing up Keanu Reeves, who has in the past gone for significant training to make sure he can do exactly what it is that he's doing in his movies.
John Wick, life. He kills everybody. John Wick, the John Wick 1,
there
2,
you go.
and 3. He kills hundreds of people.
So what do you think about that, though? Is that these statements like that you should just I mean, you've already sort of talked about that, but it, to me, that reflects like I think that a lot of the people opining on this, and then Baldwin himself, to blame, I guess, a lot of the responsibility on it as just not in my chain of command, as some I don't know. It just seems to me to seem a little bit naive when it comes to firearm use.
Well, Joy Behar, I don't know what movie she's been in. She's talking about the actors are concerned with their lines. I haven't heard of her being in a movie or starring in anything. I don't think she knows what she's talking about. You got a gun, okay? I don't care whether you're worried about your lines or not. You want to make sure it's not really going to shoot anybody. I mean, that's common sense. This is a gun. Are these bullets? Are these live bullets? I mean, you got to be careful with a gun. That's what makes this so bad. The firearm. If there was no firearm involved, we'd be looking at 18 months and a $5,000 fine. Firearms are aggravating factors in almost every state in a crime. You got a gun and somebody gets killed, you're in trouble.
Okay, I want to ask you about one other thing. Well, here, I mean, this is interesting. Going back to that, I got countless people online saying, this is Baldwin. You idiot. You never point a gun at someone. Well, unless you're told it's empty and it's the director or photographer who's instructing you on the angle for a shot we're going to do. And she and I had this thing in common where we both thought it was empty and it wasn't. And that's not her responsibility. That's not my responsibility. Whose responsibility it is remains to be seen. I mean, who else's responsibility could it be?
Well, they must have learned this from politicians because they're the experts at pushing things off on other people. And, when you're in trouble, you're going to do and say whatever you can to get out of it. And sometimes you say some stupid defensive things.
And you're saying as a defense attorney, they would have just been better off to say nothing.
Well, yeah, because, there's a film of it, too. So you don't want to put your client on the stand, really. It's kind of the last thing you want to do. But if they've got a film of you basically saying stuff, how are you going to answer that if you don't get on the stand? They're going to force him to get on the stand. He'll be torn apart. That's why you keep your mouth shut.
On that note, going over to AllisonMorrow.locals.com, where you can become part of my editorial board, $5 a month to submit, making sure my baby's under the desk still. He was so quiet all of a sudden. I'm thinking, did he go off to, I don't know, file charges against somebody for rocking him too hard or something? No, he's still there. Okay.
He just heard my voice and didn't want to say anything. He's afraid of me.
He wants to hear what you're saying. I think he's interested in this. And probably as a, someone who will eventually be a teenage boy, he probably wants to know the answer to this question, which is it best to respond to any and all police questions with, I don't answer questions, Fifth Amendment style defense?
No, you use the classic, my attorney advised me not to say anything. That's it. Blame your attorney. And you can blame your attorney. Biden's doing that. He's blaming his attorneys for not talking. The president of the United States, my attorney said not to say anything. Think about it.
Why would you blame it on your attorney versus just saying, I'm not going to?
Well, because it sounds better. I got legal advice, and there's a constitutional thing that I don't have to talk. And my lawyer said that I can rely on that constitutional right. It's good to throw that constitutional stuff in too.
I see. Okay. All right. Next question here. Would the case against Mr. Baldwin be different if the shooting had occurred as part of a scene and not as alleged with Mr. Baldwin apparently goofing around and pointing the gun at the victim in jest or whatever it is he was doing between the scenes? Seems to me like he would be in a better position to defend himself if his actions were within the script, i.e. had to point the gun and pull the trigger as part of the scene.
Well, I don't know where that's coming from, that he was clowning around. I mean, I'm just hearing that today. Since when has that become an issue, that he was clowning around? And even if he was clowning around, you shoot somebody, you're still going to be in the same mess. Okay. It's not going to change anything. Oh, we were following the script and I killed this director, or I was just playing with the gun. And what difference does it make? You killed somebody and you were reckless.
Okay. Next question. Well, that's not, let's wait for that one. That's about a different case. Ask if any mitigating circumstances can be considered to lessen the sentence. From what I've read, the protocol was followed in the filming and the gun was deemed safe to use as a prop. I know it is always incumbent upon us who own and use guns to verify. However, in the entertainment industry, there are standards set up to maintain safety on the set. It is my understanding the armorer was untrained and allowed live ammo to be mixed in with prop ammo in the pick. I saw the prop ammo was made to replicate the live ammo. So I guess big picture is just, mitigating circumstances. Will they play a role?
Well, I don't know about that particular one, because if the jury finds you guilty of both offenses, I don't see how you're going to get in front of the judge at sentencing and start using all the things that the jury rejected. The jury rejected all that. So, mitigation is going to have to come from, I've got a lot of children to take care of. I got a lot of responsibilities. I've never committed a crime before in my life. Things like that are going to be mitigation, not the stuff that's going to be decided by the jury.
I'd be interested in an attorney's opinion on whether standard firearm best practices would apply to an actor. Like in the military or anywhere else I've been handed a gun, it's either been shown to me to be clear or I've checked myself. Shouldn't the same standard apply on a movie set rather than relying solely upon the armorer? Tangent to this, so many actors describe how they immerse themselves in learning about the roles they play. Could this be demonstrable as an industry standard practice that even if Baldwin says he's not a gun guy, he should be familiar with their action use function just based on the roles he is playing?
Well, one of the factors that's coming out in these charges is that there was a failure to follow gun safety procedures on a movie set. So apparently somewhere there's written down gun safety procedures on a movie set. It's going to be out there, and that's what you would look at. What are these procedures? What exactly is done? Did they do those procedures? So there's already a guideline that can be put up there, and then you can match what was done to that guideline. The safety, gun safety on a movie set.
Okay, Lynn's here. Lynn, again, my husband, also technical director, also father of senior producer and executive producer, also firearm safety expert. So wears many hats. And Lynn, one question we had from earlier before we get into this next one, which is there enough information available to general public to ensure that with great level of due diligence, my bet would be am not uncertain territory? I don't know if I quite understand that question. Maybe somebody else can understand it. But anyway, Lynn, one of the things Alec Baldwin has said is that he was, what was the word again? Fanning the gun?
Yeah. Well, so let me talk about a couple of those things, if you bear with me for a minute. So the first thing is that you were talking about as far as accepted safety rules. So predominantly around the world, you're going to see 4 safety rules. That's as they were taught to even me in the military with my career in the Marine Corps, but we've actually bumped it to 5. So treat every weapon as if it were loaded, even after you've ensured it to be clear. Never point a weapon at anything you do not intend to destroy, right? Keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you are intend to fire. Keep your weapon on safe if it has a safety until you intend to fire. And then finally, be aware of your target and consider its background. And if I can, I would like to talk about each one of those in depth. So the very first one is treating every weapon as if it were loaded, even after you've ensured it to be clear. So it's a different weapon than what was used on the set of Rust, but the premise remains the same, right? So for example, my everyday carry, right? This is a Glock 19. All right. A common mistake that people make with clearing a semi-automatic pistol, right, is they will rack the slide to the rear and lock it to the rear, seeing the round go out, and then let it go back home. Like, yep, it was clear, but what they forgot to do was to remove the magazine. So when I remove the magazine, and now you see, like, yeah, there's another round put back in the chamber because it's a semi-automatic pistol. That's how it's designed, right? So the very first step of clearing any weapon system is removing whatever is feeding the ammunition to the weapon system. So in this case here, this is a Glock safe action pistol. And a neat little kind of trick that somebody told me a long time ago is, instead of looking for a clear chamber, because if you're looking for the clear chamber, you're going to see a clear chamber. What you should be inspecting is to ensure you're looking for the round in the chamber. So if you're actually looking for the round, then you'll see the round if it's there. And if you're like, no, there is no round there, I've visually and physically inspected that chamber, ensured that there's no round in the chamber, and I ensure that there's no source of ammunition in the pistol. So now as I watch that slide go home on the empty chamber, I have now ensured this weapon to be clear. So that's step number one. Okay.
Excuse me, Lynn, can I say something?
Yeah, go for it.
He had one of those old timey Western guns. He didn't have a gun like that. So
No, I
why
know,
don't you show us how you clear a 6-shooter from a cowboy movie?
I'm already way ahead of you, Joe.
Okay.
But I'm doing that to illustrate a point, though, that these safety rules work regardless of the firearm weapon system that you're using when we're talking about firearms. So not quite exactly the same, but this right here is a double action revolver style pistol. Actually, this was left to me by my grandfather after he passed away. Now, there's the source of where the ammunition is, and I can see that it is empty. I'm looking for rounds. I see no rounds in there, right? That is the only place where the rounds can go in order for this thing to fire. Now, when we're talking about a single action versus a double action pistol, a single action pistol means that the firearm is charged, the hammer is cocked, and firing and the pistol reloading happens in one action. That is one pull of the trigger, right? Whereas a double action pistol or firearm can happen one of two ways. Either A, I pull the trigger, it cocks and then releases the hammer into the ammunition to the primer, or I lock the hammer to the rear. Now it is single action and it is a lot easier trigger pull. Now, with that being said, the type of weapon system that they were using on Rust is a revolver style weapon system. And what he was talking about with fanning the pistol, you have some pistols that you can half cock the hammer. So you can pull it back halfway and it's almost a bit like a safety, but there's a process for cocking and decocking that has to occur. And the other thing is if you've ever watched any of those old time Western type shoot situations where what they actually do is they'll see if I can line it up there. They'll pull the trigger, right? And then they can actually sit there and function the hammer. Now, this pistol won't do that because you'll notice what it's not doing is it's not revolving the barrel to make that happen. In order for that to happen, the trigger has to be pulled, and then you'll see the barrel rotate into the next live round that is there. On those pistols, on those type of you'll see it a lot in the old Western, like they still do it now as a sport, and they do the whole like ping, 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 ping. That's similar to what he's talking about. But here's the so what. I don't care what kind of action the pistol is. First and foremost, you broke rule number one. You didn't treat it as if it were loaded. It's the laser principle. Wherever this thing is pointed, that's where it's going to shoot something and destroy it. And that's the whole point of it. Like there's internal, external, terminal ballistics. That's where the terminal ballistics are going to occur. Okay. So he broke rule number one, and I don't care what anybody says. If Joe handed me this pistol and said, hey, this pistol has no ammunition in it, that's great. Joe may be a great guy and he may have all the best intentions in the world, but you know what? I don't believe you, Joe. I'm going to open the damn firearm up and I'm going to ensure for myself, because here's the thing. if we took the firearm out of it and we put, like, say, a vehicle into it or whatever, and I handed you the keys to my car and said, hey, the keys to this vehicle is safe for you to drive. At the end of the day, you are the one responsible for it, whatever happens in that vehicle. You say, like, the steering goes out or the brakes go out in the car, right? Now, of course, there's certainly culpability. And I think that's where the question comes into, as far as where did these rounds come from? How did these rounds get intermixed? And I have a few points about that I would like to touch on in a bit. But the thing is the firearm was in his hand. It is considered a firearm, which is why you have to have an armorer. There's rules that apply to it, even if it's something that's, unless it's demilled, what's called demilled or demilitarized, it is a firearm and it is considered and treated as such. And he did not do that. That's just all there is to that, right? So he didn't ensure it was clear. He pointed the weapon in an unsafe direction. And then on top of that, I saw in one of the comments, and I agree with it totally, it is most certainly, like, negligence does not imply a lack of responsibility, right? So he had a negligent discharge. He was fooling around. He pointed the weapon at a person without ensuring that the thing was clear, and then he pulled the trigger. Now, I've done a lot of training where we've done blank fire training. And in that blank fire training, we've pointed weapons at each other. And we've had, we have BFAs, which is a blank firing adapter that's on the end of that rifle. And the point of that BFA is not to prevent a round from going through the rifle. The point of that BFA is for, in a semi-automatic rifle, is so that there's enough gas pressure to cycle the operations of the firearm. Same thing for going back to this semi-automatic pistol. I know this is different than what was on the set of Rust, but I want to draw your guys' attention to some things. When you see in these movies where they're using these different firearms, right? What's actually happening is on the barrel, there's a blank firing adapter that's actually put inside that barrel so it can create enough pressure for the function and the cycle of operations for the firearm. And I've worked on movie sets before. I've seen this process take place. And the point is, the fact of the matter, like, when we look at these things, like a good example would be Keanu Reeves and all the John Wick movies. There's a lot of outcry about, like, oh, the shooting and things like that. But you realize how many hours he did to learn how to shoot the way he shot and make it seem, number one, realistic, but number two, safety. Because you, again, are responsible for that tool, that implement that's in your hand. Nobody else. And so I think the areas, and I'm no lawyer, but I think the areas of culpability here are, okay, first of all, for the armorer, what are the accepted or required policies, procedures, and qualifications for somebody to hold that role? These movies, they have to have insurance underwriting. I'm sure that this is a factor within that. So, okay, there's where your responsibility lies. Like, first of all, did you even have the right person doing the right job? Second of all, I think there is a bit of irony there, just with how outspoken he was about guns and gun violence, and specifically the NRA and so on and so forth. But I guarantee you this: if you had an NRA certified range safety officer, NRA certified range master, or NRA certified instructor on that set, this more than likely, and I can't prove a negative because it already happened, but more than likely it would not have happened.
Okay,
And
Joe, go ahead. No, it's okay. I just saw that Joe wanted to respond to what you just said. Do you want to say anything, Joe?
No, not in particular. Kind of making the prosecutor's closing argument, and that's really the way it's coming across. And she should be taking some notes from you, because I would be, if I was doing prosecuting, I'd be using some of what you're saying, maybe put it in a different way. It is a little complicated, by the way, the way you're explaining it. It's hard for people to understand it. But people know guns are dangerous and they can kill you. And, you got to be careful with a gun. You pull the trigger. I mean, even this Russian roulette stuff, spin the thing and see if there's a bullet in there. It's, I don't know. People are familiar enough with guns. There's over 300 million of them in the United States that we know they're dangerous. And obviously there's a gun safety procedure that's written down somewhere that's going to be used in this trial, just like your Marine Corps safety procedures.
Well, and I just wanted to bring in this question because we're talking about Alec Baldwin's conflicting statements. And Honey Daly was saying, watching Baldwin's original police investigation video, he clearly states, "I shot the gun, but," and then changes to, "I never fired the gun. And no, I don't feel guilty because I never fired the gun." I don't know what to make of all that.
I think it was his own thought to try to put as much confusion into this case as possible, because first of all, he had to spend a lot of money settling a civil case. He lost a lot of his assets on that. And I think he thought, well, maybe I'll throw all this out and we'll have a lot of jury confusion. You don't do that kind of thing. Nobody's going to be confused by you saying things that don't even, "I didn't pull the trigger. Guns just go off without pulling triggers. Get out of here." Even Beto O'Rourke could get that gun outlawed. They don't have to pull the trigger.
And Joe, like, as a follow-up to that, what do juries, I mean, I obviously could go any way because who knows who's going to be on the jury and it's all speculation, but if a jury hears that you made a statement like that, or you changed your statement along the way, or you said something like that, and obviously the prosecutor's going to say the same thing you just said, like, come on, really? How does that affect the way the juries think through these verdicts?
Well, remember, the defense doesn't prove things, they persuade. And that's the key thing. Will the defense attorney be able to persuade the jury after his client has basically made these stupid statements? That's the thing, persuading. And I think they're going to have a hard time persuading with that out there. And that's the problem that they got to deal with. And they're going to have to get around it. I don't know how they're going to do it. Putting him on the stand is probably not going to help.
You put a guy like me on the stand, and it's going to be devastating. And I'm not saying I'm the end all be all in this stuff, but I tell you what, I've carried a firearm for a long time. I've used force, I've used deadly force, the level of articulation that goes with that. And it just goes right back to those principles, those 5 rules. Like, hey, he pointed the weapon at somebody and didn't consider what if, given his level of training, thank God the round, I guess, landed where it landed. It could have just as easily went and hit somebody else or gone through her and hit somebody else. So he wasn't considering the background. And so whether it was, path to hell is paved in good intentions. But nothing about that seems like anything at all that's best practices. The scene didn't call for it. He wasn't supposed to be doing it. It's just, I would be really interested to see what's going to come out, because when they do the whole layout and even the geometries of who was standing where, when what happened and what was taking place, it's going to be, I agree with those that say he's going down for it. Now, the question's going to be, is in a sentencing, what's going to come of that? But yes. Even for me, like, if an accident happened and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was not at fault, that it was just some kind of exigent circumstances or something that took place that was outside of my control, I'm not going to settle a civil suit until the criminal stuff is sorted out. Because I think that in my eyes, the first question I would ask is like, okay, well, if you don't feel like you did anything wrong, and if you don't feel like you're criminally liable, then why on earth did you settle the civil suit?
Well, you got to ask OJ about that. He got acquitted, and then the civil suit, they got him anyway.
Well, and that's the other side of it is like, man, and there's a lot of shootings and things that take place around the country. And this could be another aspect of this is the stance on crime and violent crimes. We're seeing things that are taking place in DC, and it's like, there's plenty of people that get charged crimes with firearm stuff, but because there's no prosecution for it, they're repeat offenders. And so half of me wants to be like, yeah, if he's in the wrong, burn him down. The other half of me is like, well, you let everybody else go on this stuff, let him go. Who cares? The only reason that this is even coming to light is because he's a high profile person, and because of the fact that also, how vocal and outspoken he's been with regard to, NRA gun stuff, and to me it's like, well, hey, if you don't like guns, or you're not into it, or you don't think there should be a Second Amendment and people should have that, then why in the hell are you making millions of dollars in movies where there's lots of gunplay? And the whole answer of I didn't know, that dog doesn't hunt with me. I mean, I remember seeing him on The Hunt for Red October. There's a scene in there where he's shooting, playing Jack Ryan's character. He's on a submarine shooting, at this basically this mole, this spy that was on the submarine. And Sean Connery is like, I'd be careful what you shoot at in there. So even then he knew, and I say it in jest, but even then he knew, like, hey, be cognizant of where you're pointing that thing and pulling the trigger. So none of that works for me. Sorry.
You mentioned juries. A DC jury, a New York City jury, probably different than a New Mexico jury. So I think it's too bad it happened for him that it happened out there in New Mexico and not in New York City or DC. He might have got a more sympathetic jury. But that's it. Remember, it's the jury. That is what it's all about. You ever watch that movie, Runaway Jury? It's a great movie on juries, okay? And that's where it's going to come down to. Who are these people?
How do you feel like one of the things I heard being brought up, like as far as that jury selection goes, because I mean, they're going to have a hard time finding anybody that's even somewhat going to be sympathetic towards Alec Baldwin on this. I mean, how's that going to affect the jury selection, do you think?
You'd be surprised. There's probably people that may come up on that jury never even heard of him. You don't assume jurors know what the hell's going on in the world. A lot of people don't pay attention to this stuff. And, look, the people that do jury duty, you got to be careful. They're like I say, it's all in the jury. It's knowing as much about them as you can. And that's the name of the game. That's where it's going to go down to. Think about 12 Angry Men, all these shows. It's always that jury. And I found what I tried to do when I was defending a case is I tried to show the jury that, first of all, I made them wonder, who was I? I would be there next to the bailiff, smiling as they were sitting down, not really looking at it, just smiling. And then when that was over, I'd have the bailiff start moving furniture around the courtroom. I got the jury wondering, who is this guy? Who is doing all? He's in charge of everything. And that's when you're trying to get to that persuasion incident. I might be able to persuade these people if they like me and they think something of me, Meanwhile, the prosecutor's sitting at his desk writing notes about the jury sheets. You're up there. You're running the courtroom, okay? And remember, your burden is persuasion, not beyond a reasonable doubt. Persuade. Everybody tries to persuade, but persuasion usually it's the person trying to persuade you what you think of them. Your wife may be able to persuade you to a lot of things, but I may be able to do it. Persuasion. And you never talk about proof. You never act like you're going to prove. You're not proving a damn thing. I'm going to persuade you that there's a reasonable doubt. That's it.
That's true. Yeah.
Hey, there were several people, not to jump in. I know you guys are taking over the show, which I appreciate because I've got 2 kids I'm wrangling in the background. But there were a couple of people who commented that Santa Fe County is very liberal. New Mexico is pretty blue state. So, it's not actually conservative. I think, Joe, didn't you make a comment about how it would be different if it was in New York? But the area that he's going to be tried in, I think, apparently is pretty blue, liberal.
Yeah, but not like the big cities of Chicago and Washington, D.C. and New York City. That's New Mexico. I mean, that's the wilderness. Come on.
One other quick question too to throw your way is about there were a question on locals as well as here about that they have film of what happened. People are saying. So how's that going to play into it?
Oh man, can you imagine all this thing about gunplay and goofing around? If there's film, like I say, he might. They're going to try to do a plea bargain. Obviously, when you go to trial and lose, you get punished more. Okay, it's just a standard rule. If you go and you make them bring a jury in, spend 2 weeks in there, and they tell you you're guilty, you're going to get punished more. So there's a lot of plea bargaining going on. Obviously, they don't want jail time. They want to be put on house arrest, that kind of thing. And then he has a career to think about. Can he?
Well, and I think a
Can he-
lot of that's going to have to do too with the prosecutor, because if the prosecutor is basically like, hey, I know this is a slam dunk, you know, the only reason I could see a prosecutor being even open to, okay, let's plea it out, is two purposes. One, for the quick administration of justice, because hey, you know, if we don't have to go to trial, that's, you know, the cost and expense of the trial and all this other stuff. Or hey, I'm not entirely 100% confident that we can get the verdict, but I know I have enough that I could get this person to plea out. And I know there's a lot of other factors that go into it, but those are the two things in my eyes that I'm seeing. And when, you know, you go back to, again, in my eyes, you know, I'm no lawyer, but building the case, like you have a bunch of other things that can be used as far as just awareness. Number one, and I believe it was in 1994, but it was around the time during the filming of The Crow when Brandon Lee was shot. In a very similar circumstance, in the fact that there was gunplay on a movie set. It was supposed to be blanks in the gun. Somehow a live round ended up in the gun and he died. From that point on, because of that and because of the liability and the outcry and all those other things, there were a lot of things policy and procedure wise that were changed in the film industry when it came to, you know, gunplay in movies. Now you add into the fact too, like even the example of, you know, and this is where some of the, like, I think the question is relevant. How in the heck did live rounds end up on the set? How did live rounds end up in his bandolier on his belt? Because it happened in the Marine Corps, and it happened to my, you know, my brothers actually. By my brothers, I'm speaking figuratively, not literally, but you know, they did the mistake that was made was live fire training was conducted on the same day that blank fire scenario based training was done. And the reality is when you go to blank fire training, you know, you don't practice aiming off. And that is also a misconception that people have when it comes to law enforcement. Like I love our president's idea of like, oh, just shoot him in the leg or shoot the gun out of hand. No, you are trained to, when the firearm comes out, the firearm is deadly force. It is nothing else. There's no such thing as a firearm being less than lethal or less lethal force. It is deadly force. So if I'm a law enforcement officer or I'm somebody in defense of my life, and I can prove that, hey, ability, opportunity, jeopardy, law enforcement has to prove preclusion, serious bodily harm, serious bodily injury, hostile act, hostile intent, it is deadly force. I have no legal requirement to try to shoot you in a non-vital area. My requirement is to survive. I have self-preservation of life. And obviously this doesn't apply to this circumstance, but again, it's just these misnomers, these misconceptions that people have, whether it's regarding use of force or deadly force, gun safety, because even the requirement as far as the law, as far as I understand, whether I kill you with a handgun or I kill you with my bare hands, I still have to satisfy the same legal requirement as to whether or not that was in defense of my life and therefore not murder versus a homicide, or no, there was intent there. And, you know, with regard to that set, like, okay, it is the armorer's responsibility. It's the director. There's responsibility there for making sure that safe practices are being had. And they had already had, as far as I understood, at least one negligent discharge aside from the one that occurred in this situation. So, man, that's a lot of stuff you got to overcome as far as when you're looking at the case that's being built against them, because again, going back to the safety rules. Okay, I thought it was clear, but it was loaded, but you still broke the other 4 rules.
Well, you know, you mentioned policemen. They also have tasers, so they have options to use less deadly force. And you ever see their belts? They got so much stuff on those belts.
Oh, I
So
train
they
them.
do have options for less deadly force, whereas this situation isn't even like that. And of course, the Marine Corps, you don't carry tasers. You're out there to kill the enemy. That's it.
We did have operations where when we were dealing with you know, when it came to things like embassy type stuff, SASO operations, we did have less lethal or less than lethal options. But again, those were very specific, mission specific. But I was fully qualified in all manner of less lethal. So OCCS, gas, OC spray, baton, beanbag shotgun rounds, rubber bullets, like all those different things. But even then, even in those less lethal things, like you could still kill somebody. Blank fire training, just because there's not a projectile in the firearm, you shoot a blank close enough to somebody's head, you can kill them. So again, it sounds like to me, I can't say what I want to say, but in the Marine Corps, we would call this a cluster, you know what?
Charlie Foxtrot.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Seriously.
I'm going to jump in real fast. Can I place a safe bet on the outcome of the Baldwin case without personally knowing judge and prosecutors? Statistic versus country club know-how, this being legal case with expected outcomes, celeb or not. In other words, I think how much will, we've already talked about location, but how much will the celebrity of it and who ends up as the judge, how much of that will play into all this?
But don't make your bet till you see the jury. The jury is the ruling thing there. They find somebody guilty, then it's the judge. They find somebody not guilty, the judge is irrelevant.
Okay,
well, and I'm not even because this was, where was this, in New Mexico? I'm trying to remember now.
Santa Fe. Which I should say, I was going to just, I'm trying to go back. Oh, yeah. Santa Fe's economy is driven by turquoise jewelry experts, chakra centering services, and good vibe installation.
And illegal immigrants.
Well, so there are some distinctions around the country, like, and Joe's absolutely right, and correct me if I'm wrong on some of this, though, but there are certain states or certain areas where, yeah, the jury also has a say in the sentencing.
Yes.
So I don't know if New Mexico is one of those. But again, all that, I mean, I think, my personal opinion, I would think, like, number one, Baldwin does not want this to go to trial.
No.
Because I think this will end up being a complete and total Charlie Foxtrot, just like the whole Amber Heard, Johnny Depp thing. I mean, just because of the celebrity of it all and all this other craziness around it. The other thing is like, just given what statements he made publicly in his behavior post-incident, he definitely does not want to go on that stand. Because
No.
In his own downfall, in that, like, what'll make it worse for him than what it already is, because it's pretty bad to me, in my opinion. Even if he got off scot-free for some technicality, I mean, yeah, his arrogance is his problem. He spent so much of his time as of late, pointing the finger at other people and talking about how, what's wrong with everybody else. Be careful pointing the finger, man. You get 3 point right back at you. And in a case like this, where he just got too big for his britches and he did something stupid that had catastrophic outcomes. Hey, man, your best intentions in the world don't mean anything to me. You killed somebody and wounded somebody else.
And not only that, his whole life has been out in the public. Not everybody does that. Not every movie star wants to be out in the public like he is. And, there's a difference there. And he's so much out. Saturday Night Live, he was doing Trump. He's getting in fights with people on the street. The cameras are following him around. TMZ wants to get something on him. So yeah, he's got a lot of people that know things about him that ordinarily they wouldn't know, and that might play a part in a juror's thinking. I don't know.
Well, certainly, I think it would paint a picture to mentality. Like, what's this guy's mentality? Is he the type of person that has limited control over his emotions? He should have probably never had a handgun in his hands to begin with.
Well, he's not Tom Hanks either. Tom Hanks would do a hell of a lot better in a jury trial than Baldwin.
Okay, one last quick thing from locals. Stoop Dog, it seems like he says, why should he even try to get off on the charge? Okay, yeah, I'm not a lawyer or a judge, but it seems to me the movie was being produced and directed by Baldwin. So he ultimately has responsibility for what happened. I'm sure there was no intent. I'm sure it was a tragic accident, but there should not have been any live rounds anywhere on the set. That's on him and the woman in charge of keeping the gun and checking it for safety. Why should he even try to get off the charge? If I had accidentally killed the woman, I would feel like a heel if I tried to get off. He has a responsibility to plead guilty, in my view.
Well,
Well, a Snoop Dogg must have gotten off his Coronas for a while, because that does make some sense.
well, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, I think now we're talking about, we're splitting the hairs of whether this is actual, manslaughter, negligent homicide, or, there's another bunch of other factors that play into that. And that, that's the other question, is what's the limitations on, okay, hey, we tried charging them for this and getting them convicted. We didn't get a conviction. Then, it's not like we could go back and try to go for something less for the same thing. We're going to have to go after something different.
Yeah, you get one shot. Now, the federal government can also come after you, but I don't see the feds getting involved in this case one way or the other. But, it's like I say, it's hard to say whether he'll go to trial. I just wouldn't want to be him right now. That's all I can say. He's got a lot of things that are putting on his mind, and it's just the way it goes. That's life.
Greg Gutfeld says that he thinks he's going to go do the time because he's got like 8 kids and he doesn't. Greg Gutfeld hates kids. I don't know if you've ever watched The Five or the Gutfeld show on Fox.
I do. I watch it.
He's got a pretty funny perspective on it.
I watch all those things, believe it or not. I'm just like to watch them. Yeah, all the conservative and the liberal.
Any final closing thoughts before we go, y'all?
I would just like to say, I think things like this and other things that are happening politically within our country is just a sign of the fact that people are getting frustrated with, okay, there does appear to be different levels or different flavors of justice for people, whether it's based on their financial or socioeconomic status or whatever the case may be. And, whether it's like how these things are done on movie sets or other aspects of our criminal justice system, like I think it really does highlight how little people really know about their own system that they're living in. And the thing I would close it with is just like, for me, like I showed you my everyday carry, like Allison knows, like I'm 99% of the time I got a live firearm on me, and I avoid 99% more situations than I would ever stick around and get involved in, because I understand the outcomes and the second and third order effects of making those decisions. When you're talking live rounds, you can't pull them back down range. And I think the same thing holds true with any decisions that we make as individuals and American citizens, that you are responsible for your own safety. You're responsible for your own defense. Obviously you can hire a good lawyer or so on and so forth, but the first step of that is making sure that the decisions you're making are good decisions. And I think that should be the biggest takeaway that the general public should take from this stuff.
You're right. I have no argument about that. Like I said, the political time that we're in, things are so divided. We used to be a compromised country, but we're divided the way they were divided back in the 1850s. And it's going to take something catastrophic to get us back together. Probably an attack from the aliens out there. That'll get us all united to fight somebody else besides each other.
Well,
as a woman told me in North Carolina one time, she took one look at me. I was walking in the grocery store. Was wearing a tank top because it was summer and I'm covered in tattoos. And she just looked at me and said, baby, you need Jesus.
You know what? There is one other question I forgot to ask. I thought ever since the Crow incident, live ammo is strictly out of question on any filming set federally. Who is the watchdog for these transgressions, and will anybody be prosecuted? Should there have been any other oversight?
I didn't really know about that Crow case. And I didn't know the feds are involved. I didn't know that.
Well, and so that goes back to like, again, defining, there's a lot of things at stake here. So you're talking about like, well, defining what is or what does constitute a firearm. And that's also why big landmark things that are coming out, like the most recent thing with regard to the pistol braces and the rules being changed once again on those, and everybody's reaction to that. And that's a whole nother, that's a whole nother live stream that we could talk about with that.
Pistol braces. What is that?
A pistol brace is so the distinction between something that is a short barreled rifle and a pistol is whether or not it has a buttstock or not. So this design came out as a pistol brace for people who to be able to be more stable and better at shooting the pistol, but it's not intended to be a buttstock. However, if you use it in that fashion, so then there was like a whole bunch of back and forth of that. It's very similar to like the bump stock thing. And the whole, so what the whole point to all that is like, okay, how do we define these different things? And going back to, I believe it was 1994 when Brandon Lee was killed on the set. And again, that was a major like lesson learned as far as like, just like for the Marine Corps, when we had this young Marine killed during blank fire training because live fire training happened on the same day. You significantly remove the chance of something like that happening when you ensure that, okay, hey, we don't have those kinds of rounds here. For example, I do training with law enforcement all the time. We use things called simunition rounds and UTM rounds, two different types of brands. They're basically paint marker rounds. They're used so that, use of force, specifically deadly force, can be used in a training scenario-based environment in a safer manner. But in all these circumstances, we would still consider that high-risk training. So prior to training even taking place, you ensure that people have the familiarization to be able to use the equipment. That's number one. You have to have the training. Number two, there needs to be safeguards and checks to ensure that, yes, that equipment and those particular types of rounds, whether we're talking blank fire rounds, we're talking about UTM rounds or whatever, that those things are swept and clear. And it needs to minimum be a 2-person check, right?
Right.
And then
I never heard of an armorer until this case that apparently that's an expert with the guns on a movie set, an armorer.
Yeah.
So that's a good idea to have that person. Of course, they better do their job right because they're going to get blamed. And also the person who actually fires the gun. Those two, just like you pointed out.
Well, and you should also have
and the armorer.
You should also have advisors and safety officers that are there observing each individual who we have range safety officers on the range for that very reason. And I was telling Allison when I was in the Marine Corps, because we have armorers, and sometimes you would get slotted with armorer duty, and they take that stuff very seriously. Like you go to turn your weapon into the armory and you have like a doorway with a little hatch that you can pass your weapon through. I've seen armorers take weapons and chuck them out into the parking lot when somebody's trying to turn their weapon in after doing weapons maintenance because they turned it in barrel first, or when they turned in the rifle or turned in their pistol, they had to slide forward on the chamber when it's supposed to be locked to the rear and unsafe. And I've seen them throw it at people and they get non-judicial punishment or, basically uniform code of military justice used against them for unsafe practices. So at a very minimum, he should definitely, on those charges as far as misuse and mishandling of a firearm, at a very minimum, he should be getting that, like, hands down, no matter what, regardless what the outcome is as far as, like, negligent homicide versus manslaughter, or, whatever the case may be. I think the biggest question is going to come is, like, what, him, in a lot of cases, the intent doesn't necessarily matter. It's like, what's the facts of the case? What can be proven to the jury, like you said? At the same token, I do think it's going to be a curious answer as to, like, okay, if this wasn't in the scene and you weren't even supposed to be one carrying the firearm during this scene, why were you pointing a firearm at this person who is a cinematographer or the camera woman or whatever you want to call her? Why were you even pointing it at him? Like, I think I would be interested to hear what the answer is that comes out from that. And that's my
maybe
biggest
he was
reason why
trying to just familiarize himself with this old gun and make sure it worked. And I don't know, that might have been a heck of a better defense. I'm just familiarizing myself with the gun. I wasn't pointing at anybody and it accidentally went off. I don't know if that would matter either, but you do have to practice.
It went off in your hands. It's your responsibility. Even we'll just say for the sake of argument that the gun did for some reason have something wrong with it mechanically where it just went off. Okay, I go back to the safety rule of don't point the weapon at anything you do not intend to destroy and consider your target and its background. So even if I was sitting there, like if I take my pistol out and I'm trying to figure something out with it, I know where I have it pointed. So even if I pull the trigger, say for the sake of argument, there was a live round in there and it went off. Well, the round went exactly where I intended it. So even though I didn't intend to shoot the round, because for whatever reason I didn't make sure the chamber was clear, at least the round went where I wanted it to go in a safe direction. So again, those rules all overlap each other. And that to me is like, man, that's going to be a tough gambit.
Well, you know, the movie people are not trained Marines, so it's a big difference between you and people that work on a movie set.
Does this matter? Ron Peterson says the answer, they were doing camera blocking at the time. The gun was pointed towards the camera for an upcoming shot.
What is that? Camera blocking. What is that?
You know, wanting to make sure it's in the right frame. You know, you're pointing to the left or to the right. They like blocking the you know, where everyone's going to be standing, and we like this shot.
I see what you mean. Yeah, like we're blocked.
So
here.
why did you need to pull the trigger then if you're
he
camera
didn't
blocking?
remember? No, I'm just kidding.
So here's what. So let's lay this out. So I'm gonna pull my cousin Vinny on you guys here for a second. Joe, I think you'll like this, just because it was Joe Pesci's character. So you're telling me that this individual managed to get a firearm past 3 people that supposedly checked it on a set that there's not supposed to be any live rounds, and that it just so happened to be pointed at the camera of this person when lightning bolts came out of Zeus's butthole and caused his firearm to go off. That's what you're telling me. Like,
I think you're a funny guy.
The 2 youths. Oh, excuse me, youths. I wore this ridiculous thing for you.
All right, I'm going to wrap it. Does it? I think we've hit our limit with both the producers and the content. Thank everybody. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks Joe and Lynn for opining. We'll see you guys next time.